We are in Ecclesiastes chapter 10. And we are, let's see, this is the 15th. Oh, whoops. There we go. Oh. Whoops. I'll get it right eventually. There we go. This is the 15th, so next week will be the 22nd, and it's not a leap year, so we are 2 weeks counting today from the conclusion of the matter, as Solomon would say. Don't want to forget that. Okay, so let's look at chapter 10. We left off at verse 10. We got a little bit into chapter 10, but not all the way. I mentioned last week that this chapter 10 is just some general wisdom. And it's kind of, as he's nearing the conclusion of the matter, saying, hey, here's some wisdom. You see wisdom and folly as a heading there in the New King James. Some versions have it as wisdom is superior to folly, something along those lines. But you see that here. It's a lot like Proverbs. This little section, it sounds a lot like the book of Proverbs, where he's giving some principles, just general principles of wisdom. And a lot of times they're in that short proverbial type format. But a lot of really practical stuff here in this chapter. And I'm going to find what I was looking for last week that I couldn't locate. I was looking at the forecast yesterday and it said 99% chance of rain. So we got it. I don't think there was ever any doubt, but if there had been, it's gone now. Okay, so I was looking at this one back in 1994. The Memphis School of Preaching did their lectureship on Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. It may have been Proverbs as well, but anyways, I know they did Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. And Jim Laws, in his chapter of the lectureship book covering chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes, he mentions that in this section of the book, Solomon is giving some general principles of wisdom to be remembered, and that particularly in chapter 10, he's gives 8 principles that, when followed, will truly indicate a wise one who is following God's divine directives. And they fall into basically 2 categories. One is pertaining to how we as citizens relate or should relate to the governing authorities, the ruler, and vice versa. That'd be the other one. The other being, of course, how the ruler relates to his subjects or those he's leading, ruling. So the first 3 verses, he says that he's got this as true wisdom teaches one acts wisely when he's careful to preserve his reputation and when he manages his affairs, as he puts it, dexterously, wisely, we would say. So that's your first 3 verses. I won't go back and cover those because we did cover through verse 9 last week. I like that. I like this arrangement, and I had not really noticed it until he pointed out. But I think you do see these 8 principles. So verse 2 teaches that a wise man has a decided advantage over the foolish man in business and in just life's pursuits in general. The second principle here in chapter 10 would be that subjects, this is from verse 4, subjects ought to be submissive to their superior. This might be citizens to the rulers. It might be, it could even go into the family, children to parents. Might be, at work, the workers to the superiors, to the supervisors, and so on. But especially in the case of verse 4, especially if you have offended that person. If somebody has authority over you in some way, well, you would do well to be submissive, humble before them, because otherwise it might not turn out well for you, right? The third principle would be verses 5 through 7 of chapter 10. True wisdom teaches the nation's rulers they're not to think that because their subjects are to be quiet and submissive under them, that they can just do whatever they please. So the second principle being, hey, you need to be submissive to those who have authority over you. And then this third one, as I put it in my notes, is don't get to thinking just because of the previous one that you ought to be in submission to those in authority. If you're the one who's in authority, don't think just because of that you can just do whatever you want. So you need to be careful who you put in a position of authority and trust. You know, it's like we talk a lot about presidents. When a president is elected and they have all these different cabinet members, those can make or break a president as much as anything. So that's a critical thing. Who do you surround yourself with? Or is it people that are going to give wise advice? We've talked to him before about Abraham Lincoln, and he was sort of infamous during that time was his, I don't know if I'd call it a feud, but he did not get along well with, Miss Gail, you may have to help me out. It was Secretary of War, I think, Stanton. Secretary of War, is that right? I can't even think of the guy's first name, but Stanton was his Secretary of War, and they did not get along. They did not agree on a lot of things. But Lincoln will be the first to tell you he knew what he was doing. That fellow Stanton, he knew his stuff, and even on one occasion, there was one occasion where Stanton just refused an order. And Lincoln, you know, some folks would be so furious they would fire that person out of hand. I mean, might even seek to get rid of him in other ways. But Lincoln said, well, if he says I'm a fool, it probably is a foolish thing. And he kind of reevaluated, and history tells us, by the way, that Stanton was more correct on that. So, but that's the humility you see there. So who do you surround yourself with? Is it just going to be a bunch of yes men? They're going to tell you whatever you want to hear? That's not wisdom. That's just foolishness. Dare we say stupidity. But you're going to surround yourself with people that they're looking out for not just for your good, I mean to an extent for your good, your best interest, but really best interest in general, what's right. And especially when it comes to matters of state and civil government, as a lot of this is picturing, somebody who's going to look out for the best interest of the state, the country, and say, you don't need to do that. And it might upset you, but I'm going to tell you because that's the way it is. It's true. So that's that third principle here. Fourth principle here in chapter 10, verses 8 through 11. True wisdom teaches it's wise to live a quiet and peaceable life. Don't meddle to your own hurt. Don't go around looking for trouble. Because if you go around looking for trouble, guess what? It's easy to find. It's a lot more difficult to live a quiet and peaceable life. And yet, sometimes the real difficulty, not always, you know, we've said before, Jesus was sinless, Jesus was perfect, he still had enemies. But a lot of times, the biggest obstacle to living a quiet and peaceable life is me, ourselves. So don't go around looking for trouble, because if you do, you certainly will find it. If you're a king and you start invading rights, liberties of the subjects, you're going to cause more difficulty for yourself. If you're a subject citizen, you start trying to mutiny, rebel against leadership, even you get toward the end of this chapter complaining about leadership, that tends not to go well. It's kind of productive to leading a quiet and peaceable life, isn't it? Some folks, it seems like they enjoy conflict. Yes, sir. Okay. I don't know. The question is there anywhere in Scripture that we could think of where it tells, I mean, obviously it'd be Old Testament, where it says what like kings of Israel could do as far as their power, I guess, authority maybe. I can't think of anything offhand. I mean, I could think of verses like, I want to say it's in Deuteronomy where it says, he's not to multiply horses in the sense of don't have this huge standing army because you need to rely on God. But yeah, I can't think of anything that, I mean, there were some general principles like that one, but beyond that, I don't know about specifics. It's an interesting question. I don't know if anybody thinks of anything else might go with that. Just let me know, but I don't think of anything right offhand. I mean, I do know Samuel, when they asked for the king, Samuel starts telling them, let me tell you about this king you've asked for. You're going to get it. And in fact, when he finishes, they're like, you know what? We probably were out of line. And Samuel says, no, the old saying, be careful what you ask for because you just might get it. And he said, no, you're going to get your king, but he's going to draft your young men into the military. He's going to draft your young women into his household. And it's, there are going to be taxes and so on and so forth. So, but yeah, I don't know. I can't think of anything specific other than just some general principles. But yeah, that's kind of goes with what we're saying here is like, be careful how you treat your people. And I mean, again, I think this goes down to even to the home level, to business. You find a supervisor, a boss that treats people like they're idiots, that treats people like he's better than them or she's better than them. That's not going to go well. It's not going to be a good work environment. And it shows a lack of wisdom. It's one thing to be in charge, but it's another thing. It's one thing to have authority, but it's another thing altogether to be a leader. And that's a lot of what he's talking about here in this section. And even as a parent, I think it's why God, the Holy Spirit, has Paul to write, parents, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Because I can be disciplining them and keeping them in line, but I can do it in such a harsh, mean-spirited, unloving way that it turns them into bitter. Sometimes they're I always say that at least when people get to a certain age, they'll do whatever they want. They'll find a way. And it might be sneaking. It might be getting to the point where they just say, I'm leaving home. And so you got to be careful about that. Even if you have authority, that's not necessarily tantamount to leading. But there's responsibility on the citizen's part as well, right? You don't want to be a rebellious, mean-spirited person either. Jimmy, were you going to say something?
This wisdom didn't even make it into the next generation.
Yeah, right?
So taxes come up, I'll tax you like we never been taxed before.
And that's what's interesting. And I mean, obviously, Ecclesiastes is written by inspiration. We understand that the Holy Spirit is the ultimate author behind this. But the Holy Spirit also, we see it throughout Scripture, using the individual for their personality, their style of writing, and so on, and their experiences. This would be toward the end of Solomon's life, and it may be that he's seeing something here, and maybe that's coming into play because Jimmy's comment was this wisdom didn't even make it to the next generation, and how true that is, because Rehoboam is going to end up on the throne. And the people come to him, and it's a simple request. Like, hey, Solomon's empire was vast. It was the biggest land area if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm pretty like 98% sure, be the biggest land area of their entire history. It was the wealthiest in their entire history. But when you have that much land, you have that many people in your household that have to eat, you got to pay them and so on. Guess what? That means a whole lot of taxes on the people. And they were taxed heavily. So they come to Rehoboam. It's such a simple request. Hey, ease up a little bit. And we're going to be your loyal subjects, and we will serve you gladly. And so here goes Rehoboam, and he asks the older men, and they say essentially just that. It's a simple request, man, do it. And you're going to have loyal subjects. Why would you not? Even if you could even be thinking in terms of, I'm not saying it's necessarily ethical. I'm just saying, even if he was thinking in terms of, well, yeah, I'll agree. I'll give him a big tax break, and then I'll just incrementally bring it back up. And we'll be right back where it was. But he doesn't even do something like that. He didn't even have the sense to do that. He goes and asks the young men. I think the implication is, and I can't say this with certainty, but I think it seems to me the implication is he just didn't like the answer he got from the older men. He wanted to hear, don't agree to this. And why? Because he was petulant, immature, and by the way, in this chapter, Solomon's going to say later on, woe to thee, O nation, when your king is a child. That ain't talking about his chronological age. You ever talk to somebody, maybe get frustrated at somebody, maybe you've been there before, and somebody says, you're being a child. Maybe even talk about somebody and say, wow, it's hard to be around that person. He is just like a little child. She's just like a little kid, and now in her maturity. So that's the idea there that he's going to say later on in this chapter. But, Rehoboam, he goes to these younger men. Well, I tell them, you ain't seen nothing yet. You want to see tough? I'll show you tough. And again, I think, my opinion, it seems like that's exactly what he wanted to hear to begin with. So now he's got the answer that he wants, which also makes me wonder, did those young men, did they really think that? Did they know how stupid that advice was? But they told him what he wanted to hear, being yes men, or were they just as immature and foolish as Rehoboam? I don't know. But they tell him that seems to be the answer they wanted to hear, so he goes back to them, and of course he says, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, and that leads to the split of the kingdom. But just responsibilities both ways here, and that's that idea, and you can live a much quieter, more peaceable life if we just mind our business, do our part. And so verses for this section, this fourth point here on fourth principle, verses 8 through 11, Brother Laws says in his chapter, the sum total of these clauses is not merely that he who undertakes a dangerous matter exposes himself to danger. The author means to say in this series of Proverbs that the wise man is everywhere conscious of his danger and guards against it. And that gets to this principle that we've talked about when we're studying Proverbs on Wednesday nights, discretion, prudence. It's the ability to see beyond what is right in front of my face and see, okay, yeah, if I ease up the tax burden, it's going to be a little less income for the state, but I've got loyal subjects, and you can't really have a kingdom without subjects, and if they're not loyal, you could end up with rebellion and things like that. So, yeah, right here in front of my face, it means a little less money for the kingdom. But down the road, it could potentially end up being more money for the kingdom. It certainly was going to be better for morale in the kingdom and so on. But that's prudence, that's discretion. And that's kind of what these verses here, 8 through 11, are dealing with. And this is right in the section where we left off. He that digs a pit shall fall into it, whoso breaketh an hedge or breaks down a wall, a serpent shall bite him. Again, it's hard to say, but it seems like maybe that's with ill intent. You dig this pit for someone else. You're digging or destroying this wall, property wall, because you're out of malice or whatever. Even if it doesn't mean that, though, the principle's still there, of looking down the road using some wisdom. And verse 9 was where we left off. We were talking about this. Whoso removeth stones shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. Look, you could be quarrying stones, you get careless, and you can get hurt, right? You can be chopping wood. If you don't pay attention to what you're doing, can you get hurt? Absolutely. And so even everyday tasks can be, they can pose danger. There are some things that we know are dangerous. Carson is doing power work, you know. You know when you get to messing around power lines, you better be really paying attention to what you're doing, but even everyday things like chopping wood. I mean, sometimes we hear about, we'll even talk about things, we'll say, man, what are the chances of that happening? And sometimes things, again, going back to chapter 9, time and chance happens to them all. Sometimes things are right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time. But sometimes it's a matter of I didn't use wisdom, and I wasn't being cautious, careful, and that's what will, as some of you here have been in a position of being a supervisor. Maybe it's out on the floor, manufacturing something like that, and that'll drive a supervisor, and especially all the way up to the upper management, they'll drive them crazy, because you get some knucklehead out there that's being careless. And a lot of times it's not just you endanger. It's other folks. But it doesn't have to be some complicated task. It could be something like chopping wood. It could be dangerous if you get foolish and careless. But if the iron be blunt and he do not whet the edge, he must put to more strength. Well, if your axe is dull, guess what? You're going to work a lot harder to cut the same amount of wood. Robert was telling me just this past week, he came in, might have been Monday or Tuesday. He said, "Did you see my new paper cutter?" I said, "No." And he was putting the little papers and things in the pews. And he said, "I was trying to cut some of these pieces of paper down to the small size so they'd fit in the pews, just for some scratch paper or whatever, if somebody needed that." And he said, that thing was driving me crazy, that paper cutter we had in there. And sometimes you'll go to cut and it'll just bend the paper or kind of almost like it tears it. And he was getting so frustrated. He said, I got us a new paper cutter. He said, "Man, that thing will cut the paper." Well, I used it this morning. He's been asking me all week, "Have you used that paper cutter yet?" So I could tell him now I've used it. And wow. I mean, first of all, it's a much better paper cutter. But it's got also a brand new blade on it. And I've been doing, when I print the handouts, I will print 70-ish copies. And, of course, that's times 2 because there's this half page. Well, for months, maybe years now, I will divide those up. And in the early goings, I divided those up into stacks of 20. So I'd count out 20, 20, 20, 20, and then whatever was left for the last stack. And then it got to where sometimes I'd go to cut those 20 and it'd start mangling them up. So I backed down to 19. Then I got down to 18. And I think it was last Sunday, I was doing them in stacks of 17. So, you know what I did today? 70. Just like that. I did the same amount in a fraction of the time. Why? Because the blade's sharp. And so you can't really, at least that I know of, I don't know of any way to do it to sharpen your blade on a paper cutter. But like with an axe or something like that, yeah, you have to stop working and take a moment or so, or a few moments to sharpen that thing. But the time it saves you, it's worth it. And the effort that it saves you. You could be saved a lot of sore muscles because you're going to have to work harder if you got a dull axe. So we get that principle. That's just as everyday common sense wisdom as it can be, but yet we sometimes forget that. We don't want to take that time. Then verse 11 here is kind of it's a little bit of a difficult verse. I had something from, I think it's World Video Bible School that they mentioned. I kind of like how it's difficult to know exactly what this verse is saying or the meaning of it. I didn't even read it, did I? Surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. Some versions have a slanderer. Sorry, I forgot to scroll here. Slanderer, where is it? Well, I thought one of these versions had slanderer, but they don't. Babbler in the New King James. You see it's quite different or at least decently different in the ESV. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. It just kind of ends it with that. But here's what, in the World Video Bible School notes on Ecclesiastes, it says, and I think this is at least big picture, seems to be kind of the idea. Here's a fellow that he's got, I'm paraphrasing, he's got skill, but he's a little bit slow in playing the music that will charm the snake. You know what's going to happen? You're going to get bit. You know, it's like knowing what you need to do, but you're dragging your feet about it. My dad used to say, it's kind of a funny word when you think about it, but his word he used to use a lot was lollygagging. Quit lollygagging around. Is that even a real word? Is it? Okay. I mean, it was a real word in our house. It got used a lot, but sometimes, you know, it's like, is that just a made-up Southerner word or what? If Bob's not in here, I always like to ask Bob, do they say that in New York? Yeah, that's right. So anyway, but that seems to be kind of the idea. Here's somebody who's got skill, but he's just slow in playing the music that'll charm a snake. He's not slow because, oh, bless his heart, he just doesn't move around fast or whatever. He's just not getting on the ball. And so, again, this fellow says here in his notes, his slowness nullifies the skill that existed. The laziness will ruin it. You might have a skill, but if you procrastinate, it might be of no good. And if you procrastinate long enough, it might be that you lose that skill, or at least it diminishes. So interesting thought there. It's, like I said, it's a little bit of a difficult verse, but that seems to be kind of big picture of what it's kind of looking at. Fifth principle here in chapter 10. This is, we live off with verse 11, right? 12 through 15. So true wisdom teaches we should control our tongue, our speech. We need to work on that because a fool's speech will bring him to ruin. Look at verse 12. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. We talked about this. In fact, this was our second major section, as I recall, in Proverbs on Wednesday nights. The fool is self-destructive with his speech. And I won't go back and go over all those verses from Proverbs, but man, there's a lot of them there in that book itself. Then it says, continuing this thought about the fool and his speech, the beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. Well, it may start off, he's just talking stupid, just nonsense, foolish. But by the time you get, it's a slippery slope with that fool. Next thing you know, he's to the point of madness, sinfulness. It's kind of like when you're sitting around, when you're kids maybe, and there's always some fool in the bunch. And maybe he says, you know what we could do? I was sitting around one day and some of my buddies, somebody says, you know what we could do? We could just, we had a late start that day because of, they said we might, like a 20% chance that we might have some ice on the roads or something. So we're not starting until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever it was, because, of course, nothing happened. So my mom had to go on to work. Dad had to go on to work. I got in my truck and went to my buddy's house. We're all sitting around. Several of us met up there. You know what we could do? We could just stay here. We didn't even have to go to school. Yeah, I guess we could. And that's how it starts, and you sort of laugh it off. And then you go to school, right? Well, not if the fool keeps talking and keeps influencing. Next thing you know, you stay at home and, well, like Moses said to those 2.5 tribes, be sure your sin will find you out. And it will. And then you got the answer to the school for skipping out on school, which that ain't even the bad part, right? It's answering to mama. Ask me how I know. So he says, hey, his words start off as foolishness, but the end is mischievous madness. It's a slippery slope with this fella, and the fool's not going to learn wisdom in his speech. He's not going to control his speech, and so we would do well to learn to recognize him and stay away from him and shut him out as far as not listening to what he says. The labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them. Why? Because he's stupid. Because he does stupid things. He does dumb things. He knoweth not how to go to the city. I was talking to somebody Wednesday, and I was afraid. My Ecclesiastes and Proverbs studies, I'm so glad to be finished next week with the Ecclesiastes study, because they keep running together in my mind. And sometimes I'll think, oh, no, I forgot to mention that. No, wait, that's coming up Sunday in Ecclesiastes. Oh, I forgot to mention this. No, that's going to be Proverbs class, because, there's a lot of similarity between these books. But I thought I had forgotten this, and I realized I just didn't get to it last week. But the labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, verse 15, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. We might word this in our terminology, something that I heard sometimes growing up. Boy, you act like you ain't got enough sense to come in out of the rain. I mean, you stop and think about that. That's pretty foolish, right? You got somebody just stands out in the rain. Well, it's raining. It's, even in summertime, that rain's cold. You're cold, you're freezing, but you're just standing out there in it. No reason. It's not like you got work you got to do, some purpose to it. Just standing in the rain. That's, I suppose, where that expression comes from. But we hear that sometimes. I don't know. There are other similar expressions, but that was one that I heard a lot growing up, said toward others. Sometimes it was said toward me. Boy, you act like you don't have enough sense to come in out of the rain. And we get that. That's the idea here with this fool. He didn't even know how to go to the city. Well, how do you go to the city? You walk up and walk through the gate, right? I mean, it's like the. Do y'all remember the comic, The Far Side? Anybody else like The Far Side? Billy likes The Far Side. I know Miss Gail likes it. We've talked about it before. It's just a different sense of humor that fella had. And I always enjoy The Far Side cartoon or comic. And there was one in particular that it's this kid, and he is pushing with everything he's got on this door. And it's got a handle, and the door says pull. And then on the window, labeling the door, it's like, Acme School for the Gifted. And it's just, that was always one of my favorites. It always made me laugh. Here's a guy, he's trying to get in. He's going to the School of the Gifted, but he's pushing everything he's got, like, wow, I want this thing open. And it's a pull door. So Yeah, that's the idea. Sometimes even smart people, intelligent people can be foolish, right? It's not always about IQ. All right, let's go on, man. Time gets away. Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child. I mentioned this just a moment ago. And thy princes eat in the morning. Woe to you when your king is a child. It's not talking about his age. Because I know of at least one king who was a child, and he was quite a good king. Who was that? Josiah. He was a good king. He had some help. We understand that, but he chose to follow God even while he was still young. A lot of young folks. I've known young folks over the years that sometimes were more mature than a lot of adults, sometimes more intelligent than some adults, but it's talking about woe to you when your king is a child in his maturity. I was trying to work these. I think I got ahead of myself on these principles. I was trying to cover some of these verses while I'm going through the principles. So controlling our speech, that was verses 12 through 15. Then this section here that I just started is verse 16. Verses 16 to 17, this will be principle number 6 from chapter 10, that rulers should manage themselves discreetly. They need to be generous. They need to be mature. They need to be temperate, self-controlled, in other words, and not just extravagant, which kind of goes with self-control. So the ruler needs to be mature and not acting like a child. If he's just somebody who's trying to satisfy his own fleshly appetites, that's that idea, thy princes eat in the morning. Well, what food can you expect for a nation if you got a ruler that he just wants to consume it all for himself in the morning? Not like we're going to go do our work and then we're going to take it easy and celebrate, relax. No, he wants to party in the morning. So that's going to be a problem for you. That's going to be a problem for the whole nation. The public good, Brother Law says, cannot help but be better served when its leadership is honest, sincere, and well-balanced in the execution of their duties. The community is well served when leaders place the public good ahead of their own. And that seems to be the idea there. Verse 17, blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. They eat when it's time. They're not eating just because, well, nothing better to do. Or they sit around, let's just drink and get drunk. No, they're eating for strength to carry out the work, especially in this context, the work of the nation, running the nation. Now, verse 18, 18 is principle number 7. Being diligent, true wisdom means being diligent in one's business and to provide well for one's family. Laziness is destructive both to private and public concerns. And with such laziness, the building deteriorates. One fellow mentioned this, I think it was in the World Video Bible School notes. It said, here's a fellow, by much slothfulness, it says, the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands, the house droppeth through. Well, here's a fellow that he's foolish, he's lazy, and again, the World Video Bible School notes say something to the effect of, the rain's going to test the roof. But a lazy man, he gives this illustration of here's a lazy man, and he says maybe it's sunny out, clear skies. Somebody says, let's go repair the roof. Repair the roof? Well, it's not even raining. Well, how do we do that? Then the rain starts. Now your roof starts to leak. We better repair that roof. Do you know what the lazy man says then? I can't repair the roof. It's raining outside. We'll do that when it's nice, when the rain stops. It's kind of like, remember in Proverbs, in fact, I think we looked at it Wednesday night, the fellow that says, there's a lion in the streets. I can't go work. Might get attacked by a lion. There's danger out there. It's just any excuse to be lazy, to avoid the work. And that's the idea. And the idea here also being just buildings, nations, things have upkeep. And if you don't keep them up, they're going to decay. They're going to drop through. And then eighth principle here is in verse 20. I was looking to see. We didn't get 19, did we? I don't think he, in his principles, his 8 principles, I don't think he got 19 in there. Yeah, I think it kind of goes with 18 is what it seems to me, yeah. Feast is made for laughter, wine maketh merry, but money answers all things. One of the commentaries, I want to say it was a College Press commentary that I was looking at, said verse 19 is kind of the theme song of a fool. I mean, this is kind of his motto, what we would say his MO, modus operandi. Feast is made for laughter. Let's party, y'all. Wine maketh merry. He just won't sit around and drink, do nothing. And money answers all things. This is not Solomon trying to tell us, hey, man, money answers all things. This is the fool. He thinks money answers everything. Well, you try that and see how it goes. It might answer some things. It might answer a lot of things. But it won't answer all things. You can stand before the God of heaven and offer him all kinds of money. It won't answer that. Then he says, curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. This is the 8th principle. It's truly not wise to speak ill of one's rulers, not even in secret. Subjects of the nation don't need to harbor disloyal purposes in their minds, Brother Laws says, nor hold rebellious notions against the government. Chances are those views will be brought to light. What's our expression that we use that I'm confident has to come from this verse? What do we say? A little bird told me. Sometimes we'll use that expression. Don't join a group that speaks ill or plots to overthrow those in authority. Let God take care of the wicked. Over and over, Scripture addresses this. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And then he's going to go into chapter 11 and kind of continue some of this wisdom, which we'll have to grab that next week. 11 and 12 we'll kind of summarize quickly next week. But to me, these are a little bit more straightforward, with the exception maybe of that one section, the early section of chapter 12. But that's pretty interesting, and we'll talk about that next week. And we'll wrap it up, get to the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's what he's working down toward, because that is man's all. That is the real meaning and purpose of life. Thank y'all so much for your time and attention. We will have a short break before worship begins.